One of the things that I think is really helpful to think about as we're thinking about culture and how culture is really embedded in everything that we do is to think about how do we develop our complexity through which we can understand ourselves and our relationships to each other. When folks started really focusing on diversity and inclusion back in the 1980s, one of the things we used to think about, particularly coming from the 60s and the movements of the 70s, that if we had exposure to people who were different, if we were in the vicinity of difference, we would actually learn how to interact across that difference with more competency, with more awareness, and that awareness and sensitivity was enough to change our behavior. We have since learned that not so much. Because as I was saying earlier, one of the things that we know is that Jennifer, your minister, whoever, you and I might have the exact same experience. And you might lean into it with curiosity and openness, and I might lean into that experience with fear and anxiety. So it's not our experience. It's how do we experience our experience? What are we bringing to that experience? What is our lens? What is our expectation? How much are we able to find commonality across difference? Because if we can't find commonality, we can't build relationships. But if all we do is find commonality, and we literally whitewash the differences, I might be able to connect with you in a surface way, but I really don't understand your experience. So the idea is, how do we actually develop the ability to find commonality with complexity and find the ability to see differences with complexity? And if we can do that, then we can build deeper relationships and also have some reflection on what is our congregational culture? How does it look to people like me? And how does it look to people who are different than me? How do I hold those multiple perspectives as I'm thinking about reaching the goals our congregations have around diversity, inclusion, and equity? One of the things that is really helpful in doing that is this thing called the intercultural development continuum. This model presumes we learn about people who are different than ourselves the same way we learn about everything else, which is developmentally. So it's not that I'm racist or I'm not, but I actually learn about that complexity in a developmental fashion. In almost every other place in my life, as a therapist, as a community organizer, as somebody who's done deep social transformation work in community, we always say it's important to meet people where they're at, as a core principle of community organizing, certainly of psychotherapy, and I suspect of pastoral counseling as well. We want to meet people where they're at in their faith journey and help support them as they develop more of their faith journey by way of example. So that is true in almost every other thing we do, except when it comes to cultural competency and race and other forms of diversity. It's challenging because we say we want to meet people where they're at, yet what we do is want them to be where we want them to be and judge them when they're not there. And or we use educational methods that assume everybody's in the same place. And if they don't get it, then they're not woke, which is really counter to the values we have about everything else about meeting people where they're at. So what the developmental model does is provide me with a set of tools. Because if all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. With the developmental model, I have a whole toolkit that helps me figure out where are people at, and then how do I help them continue to move towards the kind of diversity, inclusion, equity goals that we have.